Hi, I'm Jamie Mason Cohen, and welcome to Signature Leadership, a show that helps world class leaders discover their authentic selves. And in the process, we, learning from them, can discover our authentic selves. Our guest today is Mark A. Herschberg. Mark has gone from tracking criminals and terrorists on the dark web to creating marketplaces and new authentication systems. Mark has spent his career launching and developing new ventures at startups and Fortune 500 companies and in academia. He helped to start the Undergraduate Practice Opportunities Program, dubbed MIT's Career Success Accelerator, where he teaches annually. At MIT, he received several degrees, including, I think, a bachelor in science and physics, another one in electrical engineering and computer science, another in a master's in engineering and electrical engineering and computer science, focusing on cryptography, which I don't exactly know what that means, but it sounds fascinating, and I might ask you about that. At Harvard Business School, Mark helped create a platform used to teach finance at prominent business schools. He also worked with nonprofits, currently serving on the board of Plant a Million Corals. He was one of the top-ranked ballroom dancers in the country, another incredibly interesting component of him, and now lives in New York City, where he's known for his social gatherings, including his annual Halloween party, as well as his diverse cufflink collection. Now, we might touch on all of those things. However, what we are really going to dive into is drawing on nearly 20 years of teaching at MIT's Career Success Accelerator program and a career spanning half a dozen industries. Mark distills the key skills for a 21st century career into the Career Toolkit, essential skills for success that no one taught you. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you for having me. It is my pleasure to be here.
Mark, there's so many different things that I want to tap into. I just love the diversity of both your business background as an entrepreneur, as a trainer, as an author. There's so many places we can go. I want to jump into one area that I'm particularly interested that seems to come up, especially with small to mid-sized business owners who I'm dealing with on a regular basis across North America, and that's AI. Can you tell me what should we know about AI when it comes to careers today?
We're recording this in the fall of 2023, and AI has, of course, been in the news. Now, AI has been around for decades, but recently we've seen LLMs, large language models, really come to the forefront, and people are talking about the impacts it's going to have on our companies, on our careers, on our customers. Effectively, when we're talking primarily about large language models, these are tools that can generate a large amount of content very quickly and easily, but they have some limitations and flaws, hallucinations where they make up information. They have just areas where they're not as good. So what do we need to do? This, I'm going to give you the quick headline. We can dive into this a little more, or I go very deep with some companies when I come in to look at their strategy and what they want to do. So as a company, if we have a lot of content, and content isn't just stuff on my website or social media, it could be writing up strategy documentation or analysis. These tools might be able to help you. And I have a free framework, it's in one of my blog posts, for how you can add AI into your company. It's just bringing it in, doing some experiments with it across the company, seeing how it works, and then reflecting on where might we see value. So we do want to bring it into our companies because if you don't, your competitors will and they might gain an edge. As individuals with careers, we need to recognize that AI is going to eat away at some of the work we do, and we need to focus on the more higher value activities that can't easily be replaced.
Okay, before we dive into it a little more, can you just tell what your perspective or credibility is when it comes to having this deep understanding of AI as it relates to business?
Well, as you noted, I have a couple computer science degrees from MIT and did take some AI classes as an undergrad. Back then, AI wasn't quite as advanced. But in the subsequent years, not only have I grown and run businesses and learned the business side, but I've also, as a CTO, CPO at my own companies and consulting to others, have run AI ML teams and data science teams. And so I've been keeping abreast of this and applying it to businesses for the last few decades. Two of my patents, one issued, one pending, are specifically about AI, and some of my other patents do use AI in them.
Perfect. So let's say, hypothetically, I run a mid-sized business in Canada. What are some tools right away that I could, like, where do I start when it comes to implementation of AI?
You need to look at individual business operations. And that's why when you do this program to bring in AI to your business, and programs may be too strong a word. It's a very simple process you can do on your own. This isn't hire me to teach you how to do it. Go do it. You don't need me. What you want to do is across your business, tell everyone, give them a little background in what the tool is if they don't know, and then say, we are going to give you some time to experiment with this. Now, you have to put in certain guardrails because you don't want to put in proprietary or customer data, and recognize you don't want to just take what it gives you and send that out. So put in some guardrails, but let people play with it. Because you, as a CEO, you don't really think about day to day, what does your bookkeeper do? What does your social media marketer do? They understand their task better than you, and let them try it. Now, again, give them time. Don't just say, yeah, go do it on top of everything else you're doing. Say, we're going to block out time. We expect less from you during the next few weeks because we're going to give you 5, 10, 20 hours to play with this, to try it. You're going to suggest a few tools or let them discover on their own. And they're going to find, well, in my job, here's how I can use it. Her job is different. She uses it a different way. And his job, he doesn't really have a way to use it. And then you go back and say, well, here's the different places we can apply it. Now, what makes sense and is within the guardrails?
What are 2 or 3 tools that you might recommend as a place to start, and what might they be best connected to within a team? So, for example, if I wanted to use AI for strategy, what might be a tool that could help me with that? Or what might be a tool that could help me with sales? Could you talk on a few tools and make general connections to what they might be applicable for?
I'm not going to give specific names, partially because by the time you hear this, which could be 6 months from now, there may be different answers. But let's talk about categories of tools. Certainly, we know that large language models, again, generate content. So if you are looking for any type of written or visual content, content for your website, content for white papers, content for social media posts, content for just marketing output, and corresponding images, you may want to look at these large language models. I'll give you an example. I write all my own blog posts. I do not use AI except spell check and whatever that has built in. But all my images these days, I just go to an image generator and say, hey, I need an image. I had one the other day about how I was riding in the Andes Mountains and being on a horse on a ledge and how this relates to leadership. And I told the image generator, I need a picture of a man riding a horse on a ledge. Seconds later, I had it. I would not be able to find that in most image search tools. So we can quickly generate content. If you're doing PowerPoint presentations internally, you now have tools that can help you do just nicer layouts. Not going to necessarily drive dollars to the bottom line, but it can make your presentations more impactful internally and externally. Now, if you are looking for strategy, for example, you can use it for either high level, hey, what are some suggestions on strategy here? Or you can have it analyze certain data and trends. And there are certain classes of large language models that specifically can look at spreadsheets and data sets and do some analysis for you. Again, double check everything, because the way these work, it won't always give a logical or right answer. It often does in certain cases, but it's kind of like a doctor would never just say, well, the LLM says do this, so take this pill. We want the doctor and her expertise. So you, the employee, have expertise, double check everything it's giving you, but it's going to help get you started in certain ways. So it can do some of that analysis for you. And then you can find more specialized tools. In fact, I'm consulting to a company right now that has a specialized sales tool to use AI in the selling process. And we're going to see more of those come up. So think about the individual functions and where these tools can apply. And literally, if you look this month, a month or two later, there will probably be more options.
Okay. Well, this is a great place to transition to your book, which I'd love to talk about a few areas that I also have some interest in my work. Your book is called The Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You. What are some of the essentials of a high-performance team that you found through the process of writing the book and also from your own experience?
Really, most of the modern workforce is about communication. Now, yes, we need leadership and management and many of these other skills I talk about in the book. But when you get to the core of the high performing teams, if you think about what we do in our business, for most white collar businesses, we are transforming information. It's no longer I, the manager, have to just say, turn the screw faster. Okay, good job. It's making sure the right people have the right conversations at the right time. That's it. Now, we might do that through meetings. We might do that through emails. And these could be regular, well, we're sending the weekly status update email. Or it could be whenever we hit this point, a customer's unhappy, send an email. That's more ad hoc. But all of our processes, all of our tools are really about communicating information flow. Even when we write code or create a report, it's taking some knowledge over here, transforming it, embedding it into code or into the status report, and sending it out. And so once you understand the information flow, you're on your way to creating a well-functioning team and organization.
Can you think of a positive example of a high-performing team who executed in that way?
I can think of some of my clients because I spend a lot of time focusing on what do we need to do? And it's really mapping out the business process. And I've met companies where they've said, oh, we have way too many meetings and emails and just the usual chaos that we've seen. Well, let's step back. What is it we do? And you might have some regular weekly or monthly operating practices. For example, closing the books each month and doing the financial report. You might have sprint cycles with your engineering team, but then you might have larger things such as doing your strategy, which involves finance and product and sales. You might have a release in your product, doesn't happen every sprint, that might happen once a quarter. So you have large cycles and small cycles. And it's just recognizing for each of the cycles, what's the input, what's the work, and what's the output? Do we need to have these daily meetings? And if so, what are they about? Do we need to send a weekly email and what needs to be in it and what shouldn't be in it? And then how do some of the smaller processes feed into larger processes? And once you do that, I've gone to companies, we've eliminated a lot of meetings. We've become a lot more efficient. We've avoided the confusion people have with all these different channels about, is it Slack? Is it email? Do I leave you a voicemail? Now is it Zoom? And we're much more clear and coherent. And so we remove some of the operating friction.
I want to touch upon one part of that last answer, and that is, how do you reduce meetings so that you can make them more effective?
I would recommend two things. First, recognize there are only 3 types of meetings involving more than 2 people. And the 3 types are as follows. There are the broadcast meetings. One person or a small number of people are broadcasting to a large group. Think about, for example, a town hall meeting in the company. Like, we want to share, here's what's going on. Most of you are listening, a few of us are speaking, there's a broadcast. Or when you send an email to the whole company, same concept. Next, you have what I call end-to-end meetings. The first is one-to-N. These are end-to-end meetings, and that's typical of a weekly or monthly update meeting. We get the management team together once a week. We all do a quick report on where we are. That's an update. So each of us is updating everyone else at the table. That's an end-to-end update. And then we have decisions. We have to make a decision. Where are we going to hold the holiday party? What's the budget for next year? Should we expand to Europe? Whatever it is, small, large, making a decision. Those are the 3 types of meetings. Now, of course, we can combine them. You can imagine at a monthly meeting, the CEO says, I want to update everyone. Here's what's going on. Okay, now everyone do your report.
Yeah.
And then we need to decide this. But you want to be explicit about, here's what we're doing in each part of the meeting. Here is the purpose. Here are the people needed. And here is the objective. And this is where agendas, of course, help. Because what happens is we have these zombie meetings that start for one purpose. And then, well, as long as you're here, let's talk about this. but Carol wasn't here and she needs to be part of it. But, well, it seems too inefficient to go find her. And your meetings just spiral out of control or new topics get added and it's not the right people. So be focused and you'll be efficient.
Do you think it's presumptuous if you're leading a meeting to, in a pre-email to each person who's participating, to assign specific responsibilities within that meeting or specific areas that you would like them to touch upon?
Not only is that not, I think you said rude or inappropriate or whatever you said, not only is it not that,
Yeah.
this is a good thing. And let me give you an example. We talk sometimes about introverts and extroverts at work. And if you think about a meeting, topics come up. You can't plan everything. In fact, even though you heard me say agendas, I often say you do have to let it go a little outside because that's where the creativity and innovation happens, and you can't schedule that. But if you are going to have a meeting, say, well, we need to decide this. And at the meeting, you say, here's all the relevant information, go. What happens? The extroverts say, okay, well, I have an idea. And what if we do this? And they're jumping in and they're engaged. And the introverts are saying, oh, wait, everyone be quiet. Please be quiet. I need to focus and think. And they get drowned out. What I recommend is you want to give the introverts that space. And we're using extroverts and introverts as just more thinking modes, but that's the common labels we use to give people that quiet time. Now, one way to do that is ahead of time and say, here's what we're going to be doing. So take some time to think about it the night before, an hour before, whenever works for you. And that gives them time to have the quiet and think, and they can go and say, okay, I've got my notes, so I'm going to read off what I wrote. Or even within the meeting, I'll sometimes say, all right, everyone take 3 minutes before we start to speak. Now, when you do that, the extroverts go nuts. No, I just want to speak. Just let me speak. I think best when I speak. But the introverts really appreciate the time. And you're just flipping it because the introverts were having frustration when everyone was speaking at once. So now you're just balancing it out in the meeting.
That's so true. And I find I would call myself a situational extrovert. So I think Daniel Pink said that we're all a little bit introvert and extrovert, just in different levels. I find that I like to get my ideas on paper and not share them at first because I feel like I end up putting it out there and I lose this inner motivation and this inner spark. And you see people who think on their feet, who are not thinking on their feet, are constantly wanting to express everything on their mind as a way to get their ideas out there. And it's good to understand how people process, brainstorm, which maybe is not the best term these days, understand how their mind works so that they can, within a team, get their message out in a way that taps into those different diverse thinking styles.
And I talk about that in other areas of the book.
Yeah.
In chapter 7, communication, we talk about different communication styles based on modes of thinking. And in the chapter on leadership, we talk about different aspects of leadership. In working effectively, we even talk about different work styles. And so it's recognizing that we do have these individual styles. And very importantly, when we communicate or engage other people, once we understand their style, we can better engage with them. When you do it wrong, it's like if I show up in France and I start speaking English, everyone looks at me and says, either I don't understand, or I do, but I'm not really happy with you speaking English because that's not my preferred method, and just makes it that much harder to engage. But if I learn French, it will be so much easier to engage with people. And that's what we want to do, not with language, but with work styles and thinking styles.
Yeah, Mark, on your point about if you're in France and you're speaking English, I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into really what you also framed an earlier part of our conversation with communication. My interest in this is I've done some training within healthcare where I've worked with clinicians and physicians across the world in 21 different countries virtually or in hybrid settings where I was here in my office in Toronto and they were across Europe and across Africa and the Middle East and beyond. What I found was in different cultures, people communicate in different ways. And especially in the hybrid culture we live in, even within healthcare and telemedicine, people are in the healthcare world also communicating in different ways that they might not have communicated pre-COVID or around this time. So my question to you is, and it's a broad question, so I'd really appreciate if you take it where you think would be most beneficial. I would say to people in healthcare and even to mid-sized business owners, different, yet there might be some crossovers with them communicating with hybrid and diverse teams. How do you effectively communicate with people with different backgrounds within a business context?
You do need to understand these styles. And I'll give an extreme example. So, one from my own culture. I'm Jewish, I'm a Jewish New Yorker, and we'll stereotype a little. We tend to be very upfront, we're outspoken, we'll be argumentative. And take Israelis, you see that a lot in the Israeli culture, because we all have a similar background, whether we wound up in New York or Israel. And if you're in meetings, which a bunch of Jewish New Yorkers or Israelis, you will see us argue and almost shout back and forth at each other and disagree. And that's normal. If you go to Asian countries, let's take Japan, you do not have such open disagreements. And you never disagree with your boss. In fact, I want people to disagree with me. That's one of the things I look for when I hire people. And those are two inherently different styles. Now, if I were to go to Japan and bring my New York style, I'm going to offend everyone. Likewise, someone with that traditional Japanese culture in one of my meetings would probably just sit in the corner and get lost. And so we want to recognize these differences. Now, I just gave one in terms of engagement and kind of speaking up and disagreeing, but we see other aspects of this. For example, in some companies, and this can even be at the company level, not cultural level, you have the discussion at the meeting. And whether you're loud and disagreeing or just quietly, politely disagreeing, you have at the meeting that discussion. Whereas in other companies, that discussion all happened in the hallways and individual offices privately, and the meeting is fait accompli. It's just to rubber stamp what had already been decided. And understanding those styles is very important, because you show up to the meeting saying, all right, I want to influence the decision. What do you mean it got made? And now you're out of the loop on that. So we do want to recognize both culturally, but even corporate culturally, what these styles are, and make sure our work style fits into that.
Along those lines, are there specific things you can say or approaches you can take to better understand your own team if you're a leader, so that you avoid some of these misunderstandings or inappropriate ways of dealing with people who might be different?
Great question. There's two easy things you can do right now. First, I happen to be a fan of assessments. Now, the most famous is Myers-Briggs, and that's kind of controversial. But if you use that, if you use DISC, Strength Finders, I've used HBDI in the class at MIT, whatever you prefer, using these, we all sit down and say, oh, I recognize your style is different than mine. No one's better or worse, but this is helpful to understand. This is why you get frustrated, because I come at you, I show you a bunch of charts and numbers, and I get really excited, and your eyes always glaze over. I never understood that, but oh, that's not your preferred style. Great, that's helpful. And they can do this for individuals as well as for teams. The other thing you can do is take the implicit and make it explicit. Companies don't understand what corporate culture is. If you look at a company, they have a website and they say, these are our 7 values, customer first, whatever it is. Lovely, wonderful, great. Real corporate value is what happens day to day in people's jobs. You might put the customer first, and maybe your employees do that, maybe not. But if someone knows, don't give my boss bad news because he's going to bite my head off, that's your culture. And that never gets put on the website. So we need to take these implicit understandings, not necessarily at the whole level. If you're a big company, it might be at a department or group level. Say, let's really understand, what is the culture? We prefer emails to meetings. We want bad news to be delivered up front, or don't give a problem unless you have a proposed solution. Whatever it is, but let's be explicit about this. Otherwise, people slip up.
I like that. On ethics, another area of your book that you touch upon, what's a common challenge that many employees might face at some point in their careers? And what would be a potential solution or a way to approach that challenge?
A general class of problems is that we often face an ethical dilemma where there is an acute party at risk, and then there is a larger, less well defined or more distant party. So here's an example from this class. I was asked by someone recently about this situation. He said there was a guy looking for work. It was a couple years ago. It was during a time when jobs were scarce in his industry and area. And he's looking for work, so he called his former boss and said, "Can you give me a reference?" Honestly, this employee looking for the reference was not that great. It was mediocre at best. Wasn't horrible, no sexual harassment, no huge red flags, just wasn't very good. And the manager was thinking, well, he's got a family. I should try and help him out. So we have a very clear case of the employee who, if you help him, he gets a job and helps his family, and that's a good thing. Or if you don't, he's unemployed and his family also has more stress, economic hardship. So naturally, we think, well, let's help this person. But what we don't think about, because that's the acute party, we don't think about the larger, more distant class of people, which is everyone else applying for the job, who may be unemployed, who may have families as well, or not. We don't know. And we harm them by taking an employee who's average and saying, no, no, he's really good. But it's a little harder to relate because these are these other abstract people. And so often we face ethical dilemmas where we have a concrete harm or risk or benefit against a more abstract one. And that can be very hard for employees to face.
I'd like to touch upon your book on a different level, on a more personal level. What was it about writing the book that gave you a deep sense of purpose, fulfillment, or meaning in your life and in your career as a whole?
This has been a passion of mine for decades. I didn't set out to write this book. As we mentioned before, I'm a fractional CTO, CPO. I do tech stuff. I got into this because the people I was hiring didn't have these skills. In fact, I didn't have them at first. I had to train myself. And I got into teaching them at MIT. I helped create the course there, and I've been teaching there since. In a lot of my nonprofit work, I've worked at a program through SUNY where we were taking unemployed people during the Great Recession and retraining them, less about the mechanical skills, but more skills like what we're talking about. With a prior nonprofit I was part of, Techie Youth, and we're helping to take people who were either those who had criminal records or those who were in, blanking on the term, totally blanking on the word, those who aren't living with their family and are often wards of the state. How do we help them? Because they're not getting college degrees in many cases. How do we help put them on a career path other than minimum wage jobs? And so I've just been passionate about this. I've probably annoyed hundreds of first dates because I would talk about this with such passion. They didn't care, but I cared. And so being able to put this into the book and the app, I'm able to give it to a larger audience and impact more people and help them with their professional efficacy.
What were some of the lessons for you in going through this process of writing it?
For me, certainly the mechanics of doing the book. I've done multi-million dollar projects in my companies and others. I thought, okay, I've done this. You always hear about authors who don't have business sense. Like, oh, I've done this. But even so, you go into a new industry, you still get tripped up on a few things, even when you kind of see it coming. I think the big challenge for me was, how do I make this useful? Because putting out a book, there's lots of books out there. But what I know from years of teaching, I teach my students, they go, oh yeah, this is wonderful. When they walk out the door, I swear I can see the information fall out of their ears. And we've all done that in school, right? The day after the final, you just said, well, I'm done with that class. So I wanted to find a way to make it more engaging and relevant. And thankfully, 20 years of teaching has helped me craft the message and understand how to make it impactful and understandable to a wide audience. But I wanted to go beyond the book. In fact, this is why I have all the other free resources on the website, because it's not just read the book and you're done. It's how do you incorporate this into your daily practice.
And what do you hope, Mark, is the biggest takeaway from the book?
I hope people recognize if you just put a little investment into your professional skills, you're going to get a great return. And let me just give you a simple example. I say this to employees. Imagine you're 25 years old and you say, I'm going to learn to negotiate. So you read my book or a different book or take a class and you get just a little bit better. So when you have a job offer for $60,000, you negotiate and you get $61,000. It's a little small boost. If you do nothing else, you just got $1,000 more for the rest of your career. You just got $40,000 from one tiny negotiation. But of course, you'll have other job offers, promotions, raises. You'll negotiate for more money. You'll negotiate for more benefits in whatever form that might take, including I want more leadership responsibility. If you learn to get just a little bit better, you get this compounding effect that's going to help you the rest of your career. And I give the example with negotiating because we can do the math, but it applies to any and all of these skills. So please invest in getting just a little bit better at these skills because they will help you be more successful in life.
On that note, I was just listening to another podcast with Rich Roll, who's a triathlete and a best-selling author, and he was interviewing another triathlete named Leslie Peterson, who also was nominated for an Oscar for screenwriting. Now, the reason I bring this up is when I was looking at your bio, you have other interests. Your interests include ballroom dancing. You're really like well-rounded in a positive way. Sometimes when people say well-rounded, they've called me this too, or someone who has Renaissance interest or has multiple things that they're interested in. What is your take on, based on the Career Accelerator, based on companies you've worked with, even based on yourself as being, like we said, you have all these different roles as a consultant, as an entrepreneur, as an author. Should people today, and may not be a direct, like one fits all size here, if people are developing these skills, like you said, investing in their skill sets, do you believe that people should be more generalists today or specialists when it comes to entrepreneurship and leadership?
This is a question I talk about in some of my formal talks to companies, and we talk about the I versus the T model. The I, those are people who are specialists, and they are deep and narrow, and the T's are more broad and not as deep. Both paths make sense. If you are going to be the I, if you're going to be that specialist, you really need to know your area. If you are the top social media expert, fantastic. And maybe you could be number 2 or number 3 because number 1 only has so many hours in the week. But you can't be number 372 because then you're just with everyone else. So if you are going into that specialization, you better be one of the top. Now you can narrow it down. You're not just a social media expert. You're the social media expert for zoos. Okay, fantastic. You dominate that space. If you are going, now even then, by the way, you still need some of these skills. Learning to communicate better, just getting a little bit better in these areas will make you more effective. Likewise, if you're doing the broad approach, where you might have a functional area, let's say finance, but you should know something about sales and something about product and something about technology. I think that can be helpful as well. But there again, knowing a little bit more about being an effective leader or communicating more effectively improves your ability to execute in your job. And so when I do the talk, I look at the I versus the T, and I say there's really another dimension, which is the skills we're talking about, independent of whether you're going broad or deep.
What has ballroom dancing taught you about leadership, if anything?
Not so much about leadership, although certainly I did work with the MIT ballroom dance team and led events. And I did teach for MIT, BU, and Northeastern for a while. But it actually taught me public speaking skills. And this surprises people. The number one challenge we have as public speakers is fear. It's thinking, oh my God, did I remember? Is it my fly? And am I going to embarrass myself? Is there toilet paper stuck to my shoe? And what if I say the wrong thing? And oh my God, everything can go wrong. When you're out on the ballroom dance floor, you're dancing around, literally being judged. That's what you do. There are people watching you and judging you. And I have screwed up many times. I've won many times too, but I've also screwed up many times and learned. You do something, go, oh my God, I can't believe I just did that. Oh, and the judge saw me. And it's okay. It's not the end of the world. And so being able to do that built up the confidence of, I screwed up and I'm just going to keep going. And once you get that confidence, the rest of public speaking gets pretty easy, assuming you know your topic. And so that, even though there's not a word spoken in ballroom dancing, that is probably one of the best things to make me a better public speaker.
I love that. And is that also an antidote toward dealing with imposter syndrome? This idea of you need to just practice, you need to get in your reps, which I hear lots of speakers talk about, and you fall down, you get up, you realize you're okay, your identity is not permanently destroyed, you just may not have performed exactly as you wanted in that time, and then you realize over time that you have developed this inner strength or this inner endurance to continue on.
Equally important as you're doing it. So you're absolutely right. It's seeing my friends and my competitors. The ballroom world's pretty small. My competitors were generally my friends. Seeing them screw up, and you don't think, oh, those guys, they're idiots. Think, oh, okay, yep, I've done that too. In fact, I was speaking to a college class a couple of years ago, and the entire AV system went down in the middle of the talk. And in fact, I was covering someone else's slides. The plane couldn't come in, I'm covering their slides, so I don't even know the content that well. And it's very visual content, there's interactive stuff on the slide, so I couldn't just do the talk and continue. And so here we are 10 minutes into the talk, and it went down, and there really wasn't much I could do. But at that point, I started talking to the students and saying, right now, I'm here on stage, AV went down. This looks so embarrassing. I can't continue the presentation. Right now, what are you thinking of me? And are you thinking Mark is an idiot? And they knew I was covering for someone else. Are you thinking Mark's an idiot? Mark is incompetent? This is terrible. We're thinking, oh boy, this poor guy, this happens. This happened to all of us. And once, I hope what they took away is they learned they're not directing malice at me. They're saying, yeah, that's a tough situation, but I'm not holding it against you. And if that sunk in with them, then when they're on stage, they're going to be less scared if something goes wrong with them. So seeing other people get through it as well, which we saw in the ballroom world, because they screwed up as much as I did, helps you as well overcome that imposter syndrome.
And what I appreciate about that too is sometimes, and I believe this to be the case as well, paradoxically, comparison is the thief of joy. Is that when we focus too much on what other speakers, for example, in my case, what they're doing and how they're doing, especially if I perceive other people to be doing better in some way, then it does feel like I am enervated, as if I am being, punched in the gut on a subconscious level, even if I'm happy for them on some level. I also like what you said because it's a positive form of comparison where there's empathy. It's understanding that when that person failed or fell down, either literally as a ballroom dancer or tripped or didn't perform at their highest level, we can empathize and have some compassion for what they went through is also what we went through, and realize that we're not alone, that others, even at a high level, they do trip, they do fall on their face, they don't always stick the landing. And that's what I got from that little piece.
I love how you put that. It didn't really click for me until now, but I certainly remember one time at the national championships lining up and recognizing everyone in line with me, the people I'm competing against to win, well, these are all my friends. And we would cheer for each other, even when we're competing and they're in this round and I'm in the next, but we'll cheer for each other. And my favorite thing about the ballroom community, very occasionally someone does trip. Not often, but it happens on crowded floors. Whenever that happens, the couple will get up. Usually the couple who bumped into them will help them up, and the entire audience will applaud for the couple getting up, not in the sixth grade sarcastic way, but in the we are behind you, We are here to support you. Keep going. And I think, as you said this, I was lucky to be part of this community where everyone is supportive of each other and everyone says, we screw up too, and we're with you. Even when we're against you competing, we're all in this together. And as you know, in the speaking community, yes, okay, we might be both applying for the same speaking gig, but we're also very supportive of each other because we know we're not all direct competitors and we can lift all boats when we work together.
Yeah. And I think it's on that note, the difference between an abundance mindset where there's enough to go around and a scarcity mindset where I need to grab every speaking opportunity or else, I'll never find another one again. I'd love to go through a brief lightning round of sorts of questions that might not be easy to summarize in a few sentences, but your knowledge is so diverse and can go in so many directions that these are a few things I'd love to hear from you if that works.
Let's go for it.
Mark, what's a leadership topic that right now you're passionate about diving into? And from that topic, maybe what's one fact or idea that you're exploring?
I would say leadership through changing social dynamics. Right now, again, as we're recording this in the fall of 2023, we still see a lot of changes in society and the workplace. We're still having debates about forcing people to come back to the workplace and saying, some people, I need to be home, I need that flexibility, you're not being fair. Other people saying, we need you in the office, companies, or even other employees. And everyone has a point. And it's not just as a leader, you need to make a decision. But of course, leadership is getting people to buy into your decision, and especially people who may not completely agree with it. So recognizing that there's been a lot of changes in how we see the workplace and our expectations. They're not set in stone yet. We don't know how they're going to resolve, and they're going to continue to change. But we as leaders have to make decisions and get that buy-in from people across the spectrum on any particular decision we make.
What are one or two ways that you would encourage people to get buy-in in an idea that might not be popular within a team?
You do need to make sure everyone feels heard. Often we see leaders saying, well, I listened, I heard the comments. And in fact, the leader may very well have heard the comments. But if the followers, if the team didn't feel heard, said, well, I submitted a comment, I don't even know if that guy read it, then he doesn't feel heard. So you want to make sure they understand you have heard them, even if you chose not to go with their option.
Love that. What's one topic in leadership that you believe, based on your research and your experience, that you have found many others don't agree on some level?
It's not that people don't necessarily agree with this, but ethics is often an afterthought. If you look at most leadership books, ethics is not mentioned, or maybe the word is used 3-4 times in an entire book. I made sure ethics is one of the 10 topics that I cover in my book, and I think more of us need to make ethics not the redhead stepchild, well, maybe if we have time we'll cover it, but recognizing this is a key component of leadership.
How do you define ethics? Might be an obvious question in today's hybrid, complex leadership environment.
In terms of how it applies at work, I think it's understanding the boundaries of appropriate behavior. Now, there are some obvious things where they are defined. Do not steal. Do not grope your fellow employee. But then there are grayer areas. In fact, some of these used to be grayer areas. The sexist jokes that were probably okay in the 1960s and weren't considered unethical, we have now moved the line in a good way, I believe, and said this is now black and white inappropriate, but there's always going to be some grayer areas. And giving people a framework for how to deal with it. I use the analogy, we do training for fires in the workplace. We do fire drills, we do it in school, because when there is a fire, we know what to do. and giving people some ethical training, you're going to face some situation. I don't know exactly how that fire is going to take place in your building. I don't know exactly what the ethical problem is, but by giving you some training, some frameworks and guidance, you're going to be better prepared to deal with this situation.
Okay. 12 months from now, if you and I were to talk again, what do you hope, based on your boldest hopes, highest aspirations, will happen 12 months from now for you?
For me, I hope I've had an impact on the world, that more people are finding more success and enjoyment in their careers. Hopefully, more people are exposed to the topics in the book, whether or not they bought the book. Maybe you buy the book. Maybe you're just reading the blog post, following me on social media. All the tips in the book are free on the Brain Bump app. Hopefully, lots of people start using the app because it's not just my tips, it's from other people. And I just love to see more engagement on that because that means we're helping and impacting a larger number of people.
And on that note, how would viewers get in touch with you or learn more about the book, the app, or your work?
There are two primary websites. For the tech stuff, you can find me on LinkedIn. Just look for Mark Herschberg on LinkedIn and we can talk tech. But my main websites for what we discussed, there is the careertoolkitbook.com. There you can learn more about the book, see where to buy it, get in touch with me or follow me on social media. I put out a weekly article on the blog, and there's a bunch of completely free resources. I don't even ask for your email. Download it, take it, use it. I hope you find success. That's the careertoolkitbook.com. And then there is brainbumpapp.com. This is a free app for Android and iPhone, and it has the tips from my book, from other books, from speakers, from classes, from blogs, and it puts it into these individual tip cards so you can either pull things up as needed. Let's say you're going into a conference and you need networking tips. Open up, go networking. There's what you need right then and there. Or you set up a daily reminder. So at 9 a.m. as you walk into the office, you might get a leadership tip to help keep this top in mind and reinforce what you've been learning. Completely free. All of this is at brainbumpapp.com.
Perfect. And I will connect those in the show notes so that you can have a written version of that typed out when the show goes live. Last, I want to ask you, Mark, what did you appreciate about our conversation? And what do you hope is the takeaway? There's going to be several takeaways, but what do you hope the person watching this and listening to this takes away?
Well, first, I want to say I appreciate the insight you gave me as we talked about the ballroom dancing, and you helped me reach that revelation of how the community changed how I engaged with competitors, so to speak, and changed my framework for how we can see it as an asset. So thank you for that. I was doing it, but I think you really explicitly called out that process. So I appreciate that from you, and hopefully others picked up on that as well and can shift their mentality. But I hope whatever part of this particular episode resonated with the listeners, remember that these skills aren't things you just hear it once and you do it. It takes practice, it takes time, but as we said before, getting just a little bit better. If you just focus on one part of this episode and say, that's the skill I'm going to work on and improve, I'm going to take that idea, I'm going to go deeper on it and get a little bit better, that's where you're getting that $1,000 a year that's going to start compounding, to continue the analogy. And so I hope you walk away with at least one of those, and maybe you even queued up 2 or 3.
Excellent. What I appreciated is when I have a guest, and we just met 5 minutes before for the first time, I could take the conversation in so many different ways we did not rehearse, we did not talk about the questions in depth. A few places we might have gone, but you didn't know the questions that I was going to ask and how I was going to ask them. And you just so flawlessly and seamlessly can move from one component of leadership, whether it's AI to communication, to introverts and extroverts within meetings. And that is a gift. It's a gift to me as a not just a podcast host, a listener, someone who is a practitioner of leadership development, you truly walk your talk. And I was learning from you as we were moving through this conversation in real time. So I thank you for that, Mark. And what I hope that you, as the listener and the viewer, took away from this is that it's in your power to be a learn-it-all, and a learn-it-all is a humble leader who has the capacity to authentically not just grow, to help others in a way that best suits you. And I believe that this book is a conduit into growth of developing your leadership skills to take your organization or whoever you lead, even your family, to new ways, new heights, and to really help them, because personal development is leadership development. On that note, I'd like to say this has been another episode of Signature Leadership, where we help world-class leaders uncover their authentic selves. And like Mark was showing us, he helped us uncover ours. Thank you, Mark.